My name is Violet Hart, 32 years old, a founder in the medical technology field. 8 years ago, I walked out of this mansion with nothing but empty hands and a broken heart, after my own father declared that I wasn't fit for the real work of the family. Tonight is Christmas Eve, and I am sitting among people who once treated me like an outcast. The party is being held in the Moore mansion, everything glossy, luxurious, and cold, just like the looks they used to give me. As for the succession of Moore dynamics, my father's voice rang out, steady like a sentence being read. I've decided to hand everything over to Ethan and Caleb. I held my wine glass in hand and looked up at the large television screen in the living room. The breaking news popped up right at that moment. Breaking news: Forbes officially announces Violet Hart enters the top 50 young billionaires worldwide. Biosynapse acquisition value, $5.2 billion. The entire room froze. A fork fell against a porcelain plate, ringing like a bell, marking the end of an era. I said nothing. I just sat there silent, with a calm smile and eyes that looked straight through the faces that once dismissed me. Have you ever been pushed aside by your family, only to return and leave them speechless in the very pride they once denied? Leave a comment if you've ever felt that. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can show you everything that led to this shocking moment, because what happened after, that's what truly made the entire Moore family bow their heads. I sat there under the chandelier's light, among expensive wine and fading whispers. Everyone's eyes seemed glued to the television, where my face, professionally made up, serious in a Forbes profile photo, appeared next to the bold line. Biggest healthcare deal of the year, Violet Hart, net worth $3.1 billion. I touched the crystal glass lightly. The chill against my fingers unlocked memories so sharp they hurt. As a child, I was always called the different one. While Ethan loved baseball and Caleb studied business from 8th grade, I preferred sitting alone in the shed out back, dismantling old electronics to see how they worked inside. I once used my 12th birthday money to buy a plastic DNA model kit and spent hours watching the double helix glitter under a lamp. She doesn't like going outside, my mother told the neighbors at a backyard gathering, her voice tinged with embarrassment, as though something was wrong with me. She just stares at things that aren't real. I still remember that sting standing behind the glass door, overhearing laughter and clinking glasses, simply because I didn't want to play with dolls or practice cheerleading like my cousins. At 15, I tried programming in Python after finding a free student course online. I created a small program that analyzed journal entries for signs of depression. I showed the laptop to my family, excitedly explaining, if applied to medical records, this technology could screen early for mental health issues or brain disorders. My father never looked at the screen. He just sipped coffee and smirked. "Sweetheart, that won't make money," he said. "Learn something practical. Accounting, maybe. Or get a teaching degree. Something stable. Stop daydreaming." Caleb snorted. "Or become a nurse. Better that than playing with sci-fi code." I sat frozen, hand gripping the mouse, while my mother pulled me aside after dinner and whispered, "Don't go against your father. Stability is the most important thing." Stability. That word bound me through all of my youth. When I won a scholarship to MIT, I thought at least then my father would see me differently. But he only asked one question. "Who's paying the tuition after that?" I explained the scholarship covered most costs. He nodded, then turned to Caleb. "Where? Have you applied for business school?" In photos hanging throughout the Moore mansion, I appeared rarely, usually off to the side like filler to complete the frame. Meanwhile, Ethan's portrait in a tuxedo on the day he became a branch manager at Moore Dynamics was set in a gold frame right by the staircase. My mother never objected. She polished their ties, while I was reminded, "Don't talk back, and don't stay out late." I don't fully blame her. Her quiet compliance probably kept this family from exploding for years. But her silence also buried me at the bottom of invisibility. Once, I proposed to my father the idea of integrating AI into factory workers' routine health checks at More Dynamics, where outdated machines still ran the lines. Dad, if we detect musculoskeletal damage early through sensors and data analysis, we could reduce sick leave by more than 35%, I explained, showing him a simulation I built from open data. He glanced at it and shoved it back. This doesn't fit real business. Those numbers are fantasies. Technology doesn't put food on the table. That line still echoes in my mind like a full stop. I packed the papers into my bag, left for the dorm, and stayed up all night rewriting everything not for him but for myself. I had no supporters, no funding, but I had the one thing they couldn't strip away, the drive to prove that I, the so-called dreamer, had seen a future they never could. When Forbes broke the news, I wasn't surprised. Not because I expected it, but because I had pictured it for years, during winter nights coding alone, when my wallet held only a few crumpled bills. Now, back at the dinner table, Ethan still couldn't speak. Caleb drained his glass, his hand trembling. My father squinted at me, as if deciding whether to believe what he had just witnessed. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" he asked, his voice dropping. I set down my glass, eyes locked on his. Because before, whenever I spoke, no one listened. The chandelier's golden glow cast shadows across his deep lines. My mother stayed silent, but I saw her fingers twisting tightly under the table. No one moved, no one spoke. That silence was no longer disdain. It was the beginning of something even they couldn't yet name. I left that house on a late January afternoon, snow thick on the steps, wind biting like knives. No one saw me off. No one called after me. In my faded backpack were a few clothes, an old laptop, and a partial MIT scholarship check I hadn't dared sign, unsure if I could cover the rest. My father had made it clear. If you choose that tech nonsense, you pay for it yourself. I arrived in Chicago on a night bus, clutching $200 in my coat pocket, as though, if I let go, I'd vanish into the unfamiliar city. I rented a tiny fifth-floor room in an old building near campus. The hallway was narrow, the elevator creaked, and my window faced an alley crowded with dumpsters, the perfect emblem of the life I was stepping into. Days, I worked at a cafe. Afternoons, I picked up shifts as a teaching assistant for freshmen. At night, I lived in the university library where the Wi-Fi was free, the lights stayed on, and leftover coffee from seminars sometimes kept me awake. There were moments I thought I would collapse, but whenever exhaustion threatened, I recalled my father's words. Technology won't feed you. Dreams don't bake bread. Those words no longer hurt. They fueled me, kept me awake coding lines, building crude frameworks for the idea I hadn't dared name, biosynapse. At first, it was nothing more than a basic model, an AI system trained on medical images to spot early signs of neurological disorders. I scraped open-source datasets from public studies, ran free simulation tools. My program had no sleek interface, no marketing slogan. But when I tested it on an old case study I'd found in a journal, the system flagged an anomaly the original doctor had missed. I stared at the results, stunned. Not because I thought I was brilliant, but because I began to believe. If done right, this could change how people approach diagnosis. No million-dollar machines, no top-tier specialists, just a computer and a system that could learn. The following months, I lived on instant noodles and instant coffee. I cut every unnecessary cost, even sold the necklace my mother had given me at 16 to pay rent. Once, I was denied a loan for lack of a guarantor. They asked if I had anyone to sign for me. I thought of my father but didn't dare call. To survive, I worked nights at a 24-hour diner waiting tables until 2 a.m. The chaos wore me down, but I got used to scribbling code on my phone during breaks, then cleaning it up on my laptop back home. I still remember one stormy night, sitting at the back of the library. Only a few students dozed over their books. The free server I was using had just throttled my bandwidth, compressing my entire data set. I cried silently, unnoticed. But after the tears, I reopened the machine and started again. I sent my project to many startup funds. Most never replied. Some said not commercially viable, lacks medical advisors, or worse, sounds more like science fiction than science. I nearly gave up. Then an email appeared in my inbox with a plain subject line, "Contact from Dr. Samuel Harris." He was a neurologist in Detroit with an 8-year-old daughter who'd been misdiagnosed 3 times before the real cause was found. Through an academic forum, he had read my post about analyzing brainwave patterns and believed the tool I proposed could help similar cases. We video called late at night. I sat in my dark rented room, the screen's glow the only light. Dr. Harris had the eyes of someone who'd seen too many mistakes that couldn't be undone. He didn't ask where I studied, didn't demand a resume. He only asked, "If I send my daughter's test data, can you try?" 3 hours later, I sent back the analysis report. My system had identified the damaged region that 3 previous hospitals had failed to detect. The next morning, he wired $15,000 to my account with the note, "Seed investment for Biosynapse." I broke down in tears, not because of the money, but because, for the first time, someone looked at my work and said, "I believe in you." The apartment I rented back then leaked every winter. The heating sputtered. But I sat curled up under a blanket, laptop in my arms, feeling as if I had just laid the first brick for something that could truly exist. After that, I no longer worked as a waitress. I used the investment money to upgrade the system, hire a final-year medical student to help with data analysis, and purchase licenses for professional software. The name Biosynapse gradually became more than just an idea. It was the reason I survived the doubt. Not because I wanted to prove anything to my parents, but because I believed there were thousands of people like Dr. Harris's daughter, and I didn't want anyone else to suffer mistakes that could be avoided. I didn't need recognition, but I needed the world to listen. And to make that happen, I was willing to build everything again with my own hands. The first 3 years after leaving Nebraska, even while living in a cold, shabby room in a strange city, I still couldn't let go of one thing: hope. I used to imagine scenarios that one day my mother would call, her voice gentle like the nights she placed a warm towel on my forehead when I had a fever, saying, "I'm here." I thought maybe she was just waiting for me to succeed a little more before she wrote me, or at least sent a Christmas card. So I wrote, not one, but many letters. I mailed them home, my handwriting neat, though slightly shaky, like my hands typing late nights in January cold. In the letters, I didn't say much, just, "I'm doing okay," or "I found a small investor," or sometimes simply, "I miss your apple pie on Thanksgiving." No reply came. That first Christmas, I sent a small package. Inside was a bracelet I'd made from recycled copper wire, a project I tinkered with after long nights debugging code. I tucked in a note, "Mom, no matter where I am, I'm still your daughter." No one responded. The second year, I sent a photo printed from my old phone me, standing in front of Biosynapse's first office, though it was only a shared space with 3 other startups. On the back I wrote, "Not big, but it's mine." No response. I began to wonder if I should stop, if I should quit dragging hope out like a wound. But every time I was ready to give up, a voice inside whispered, "Maybe the letters got lost. Maybe they just don't know what to say." And I kept writing. It wasn't until the 4th year, when I returned to Nebraska for a medical conference where I had been invited as a guest speaker, that I finally faced the truth. The night before my talk, I stopped by my aunt's house, my mother's sister, to drop off some gifts. She had always been the only relative who never outright rejected me. "I've heard you've been doing well," she said as she poured tea. "Your mother still brags about you to the neighbors." I froze. Wait, Mom actually mentioned me? Yes, but there's something else. She stood, walked to an old wooden cabinet under the stairs, and pulled out a cardboard box tied with a silver ribbon. Inside were all the letters I'd ever sent, envelopes unopened. The bracelet, the photo, its edges yellowed with time. I touched them one by one, my fingers trembling. "Your father wouldn't let her open them," my aunt said softly. "He said she shouldn't encourage you, because if you came back as a winner, you wouldn't learn humility." It felt like someone had gripped my chest in a vice. All those winters, all that waiting locked away in a box. And my mother, the one I thought still carried some softness for me, had conspired to keep it hidden. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," my aunt said, her hand on my shoulder. "Your mother couldn't go against him. You know that." I didn't answer. I just nodded, a reflex. That night, I walked down the small lane behind the old church, where I used to ride my bike as a child, dreaming of a bigger world. The December wind cut sharp along my spine, but I didn't feel cold. I felt clear, clearer than ever. I didn't need excuses anymore. No more "we wanted the best for you" or "every parent loves in their own way." That silence wasn't love, it was control. A punishment for refusing to live by the script they wrote. I returned to my hotel past midnight, opened my laptop, and edited the Biosynapse homepage slogan, "From AI for medical diagnostics to unlocking potential, starting with belief." The next morning, I stepped onto the stage of a packed auditorium. Spotlights in my eyes, applause swelling after the MC's introduction. But in my mind was only one image, the cardboard box of letters no one had read. I began my talk not with achievements, but with a story. I wrote letters to my parents for 3 years. Not to brag, not to apologize, just to say I was alive, still trying. But those letters never reached them, because in my family, something feared change so much, it couldn't even face it. The hall fell silent. But in that silence, I learned the most important truth. When the world refuses to see you, you must be the one to build your own light. Someone in the front row lowered their head, wiping their eyes. I kept my gaze steady. Biosynapse wasn't born in a high-end lab. It was born in a public library, a leaky apartment, and a heart left behind. And today, it's saving thousands of patients worldwide because one person believed that what no one else acknowledged could still be true. I stepped off the stage to thunderous applause, but inside I wasn't seeking praise. I was only thinking of the day when I could look back at what was denied me and feel no pain, only strength. From Dr. Harris's email onward, everything in my life seemed to shift rhythm. That first investment, $15,000 from him, wasn't just capital, it was a milestone. He didn't say much, but in every word, I felt urgency and sincerity. When I sent back the brain scan analysis for his daughter, it took him less than 30 minutes to call. His voice shook, caught between relief and awe. "Violet, if your technology could detect this in under a minute, do you realize what you're holding in your hands?" I stayed silent. Not because I didn't understand, but because after years groping in the dark, his question touched the quiet belief I had carried all along. We began working together. Dr. Harris introduced me to colleagues at his hospital. I was granted anonymous access to complex medical records, misdiagnosed cases, patients with no clear answers. I remember that first night downloading nearly 200 neurological files, setting biosynapses to run through them overnight. That was when I realized my software wasn't just functional, it was saving lives. 6 weeks later, a young doctor from New York sent me a case report. A 43-year-old woman diagnosed with early Alzheimer's, about to begin symptom management. Biosynapse analyzed her scans and suggested re-examining the frontal lobe where an atypical lesion appeared. Further testing confirmed it was a treatable form of neuroinflammation, completely reversible with anti-inflammatory drugs. All because the system suggested another possibility. I printed that doctor's thank you letter and taped it on the office wall, the tiny ground floor room I rented in Logan Square. Under the dim desk lamp, surrounded by scribbled notes and cups of stale coffee, I knew this was no longer a student project. This was life. A second chance for thousands misdiagnosed. When the media began covering it, I wasn't prepared. An independent medical journal profiled Biosynapse, calling it a diagnostic platform that could redefine neurology. 3 days later, I got a call from Frontier Health Capital. The representative's voice was calm, a little cautious. "We'd like to hear more about your technology. Could we arrange a presentation, Miss Hart?" That call launched days I had never imagined. Within 6 months, Biosynapse closed a Series A round, raising $3.5 million from 2 venture funds and a nonprofit medical organization. I hired my first AI engineers. We moved into an office 5 times larger, with glass windows overlooking the river and a whiteboard always crowded with diagrams. We worked relentlessly. Some days I slept on the conference room sofa, only to wake up and join calls with European specialists. But through it all, I never felt lost. Everyone on the team understood exactly why we were there. Biosynapse launched its first commercial version the following spring. A lightweight system, hospital server friendly, easily integrated with most electronic health record platforms. We rolled it out for trial in 6 Midwestern hospitals. 2 weeks later, I received an email from the CEO of Pacific Meditech, one of the world's largest healthcare corporations. "We'd like to discuss potential collaboration." The first meeting was arranged in San Francisco. I wore a black suit, my hair tied in a bun, and stood before 12 men in a dark wood-paneled room on the 31st floor of a glass skyscraper. When they asked, "What proof do you have that Biosynapse performs better than existing technology?" I opened my laptop, projecting onto the wall 17 cases of misdiagnosis and how our system identified the correct condition in just 90 seconds. The negotiations stretched over 3 months. When the final contract was signed, I was on a domestic flight back to Nebraska to visit Aunt Sarah. My phone buzzed with an email titled, "Confirmed, Biosynapse acquisition, $5.2 billion." I leaned against the plane window, watching the clouds drift slowly by, not because of the money, but because I could picture that 15-year-old girl behind the house dismantling an old radio finally being heard. The news spread overnight. Forbes called me the young mind behind the medical AI revolution. CNN reported, "The girl once rejected by her own family is now the face of smart medicine in America." I didn't give many interviews. I chose instead to appear at professional conferences, forums for female engineers, and young founders. I was invited to the advisory board of the National Biotechnology Association. MIT asked me to return as the keynote speaker at commencement, and I never forgot the gratitude of one man, Dr. Harris. He sent me a photo of his daughter, now 14, performing piano at her school recital. Beneath it, just one line, "She's alive," because of faith in what was once unrecognized. I kept that photo in my desk drawer. Not as a reminder of what I had achieved, but to remember that every step forward began with rejection, a slammed door, and the pain of being cut off. From there, I learned how to build an empire not for revenge, but to prove that even what is discarded can become something extraordinary. The mansion outside Lincoln still looked the same as those old winters. Dark red bricks, a porch painted white, the pine tree out front decorated with LED lights and familiar green and red ribbons. I stood at the front door for a long time, gripping the leather handle of my bag, my heart surprisingly calm. No anger, no expectation, just presence. My father had invited me to Christmas dinner with a rare handwritten letter, ink-stained and heavy with age. No apology, only one brief closing line. If you're free, the family would be glad if you came. I read it 3 times, then placed it on my desk without reply. But I still returned. The living room felt warmer than I remembered. The smell of cinnamon and roast meat drifted from the kitchen, where my mother busied herself, lips pressed tight, keeping occupied so she wouldn't have to look at me too long. Ethan stood by the fireplace, chatting with a distant cousin. Caleb rummaged for another wine glass in the crystal cabinet. No one greeted me with a hug. Just reserved nods, as if I were someone they once knew, now back in a form they barely recognized. My father stood in the center, hands clasped behind his back, scanning the room like he was about to address a board meeting. His voice carried clearly, every word weighed and measured. Before we begin dinner, I'd like to announce some changes to the family's structure and assets. I walked slowly to the long table covered with a white cloth and sat in the chair that had gone empty for years. The wine glass in front of me was still layered with a thin film of dust, a small detail I noticed immediately. No one had prepared a place for me. He continued, "Starting next year, Ethan will serve as CEO of More Dynamics. Caleb will hold the position of COO. The assets will be distributed according to the new will, drafted and certified." A faint clink echoed from the far end of the table. My mother kept her head down, silent. Ethan clenched his fist, trying to hide his satisfaction. Caleb glanced at me, then quickly looked away. "And what about her?" A voice broke the silence. Aunt Sarah, sitting at the end of the table, her gaze fixed on my father. "Does Violet get no place in this so-called family will?" My father adjusted his suit. "Violet stepped away from the family's path long ago. She has her own direction." I sipped my wine, my eyes locked on his face. "I don't recall abandoning the Moors," I said slowly. "It was you who erased me first." The room tightened like a drawn string. All eyes turned to me. But before anyone could react, a sound cut through the phone chime of the television mounted on the wall. CNN's financial channel suddenly flipped into breaking news, its sharp alert shattering the silence. "Breaking news," the red banner flashed. "Forbes releases top 100 young billionaires worldwide. At number 17, Violet Hart, founder of Biosynapse, following a $5.2 billion acquisition by Pacific Meditech." The room froze. My mother dropped her glass, dark wine spreading across the floor like blood. Ethan's mouth fell open, wordless. Caleb sank into his chair, eyes darting between the screen and me. My father's face went pale. He stepped toward the television, as if unable to believe what he read. "Violet, is this real?" I lifted my head, placing my glass down. "What exactly do you want to verify? The Forbes ranking or the value of the deal?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, rigid, like trying to piece together an image he'd never imagined. I pulled a phone from my bag, opened a PDF, and set it lightly on the table. "This is the official release from Pacific. It includes Biosynapse's impact on neurological diagnostics in North America, Europe, and Japan." No one moved. Aunt Sarah let out a small laugh. "The girl this family called a dreamer is now a billionaire." My mother bent down to pick up the shattered glass, her hands trembling too hard to hold it. Ethan said nothing, but the arrogance in his eyes was gone, replaced by fear. My father turned to me, his face now flushed as if from a hard drink. "You kept this from us. Why?" I met his gaze. Because every time I spoke, you never listened. No one said another word. Only the glow of the television flickered across faces drained of color. I leaned back in my chair, my hand resting on my skirt. No boasting, no raised voice. I didn't need to shout to prove I existed. My presence alone in that moment was enough to shatter the order they believed permanent. My father remained frozen before the screen, his eyes dazed as if waking from a strange dream. Deep lines furrowed his forehead not with pride but with confusion and fear. The air hung heavy, broken only by faint Christmas music from a speaker in the corner, sounding jarring and misplaced. Of course her success comes from this family foundation, my father finally said after a long pause. His tone firm, but his words faltered. Ethan lifted his head, quick to seize the chance. She once asked me to look over her MIT thesis, remember? He turned toward me, forcing a smile into a memory that never happened. I even gave her feedback on the final section of her AI dissertation. I stared at him, silent. Ethan had once copied my summer presentation word for word and took the grade for himself. When I confronted him, he shrugged. We're siblings, right? Sharing a little doesn't matter. Caleb jumped in too, clapping my back hard enough to shake my glass. Actually, AI in healthcare was something she talked about since she was a kid. We laughed then, but deep down, I always knew she'd make it. My mother, quietly wiping the spilled wine, suddenly looked up, eyes flickering with unease. I always believed you had potential, sweetheart. It's just, your father didn't want you under too much pressure. I turned to her, my voice calm. And the letters I sent? The calls unanswered? The gifts returned were those for my own good too? She bit her lip, silent. My father stepped closer, voice rising. There's no need to dig up the past. What matters is you succeeded and the family is happy for you. Happy? I repeated, holding his eyes. Or unsettled that the one cut from the will is the only one to put the Moors on the global map? Ethan shifted uneasily. Caleb bent over his class. Bone, pretending to scroll. My mother stood by the glass cabinet, clutching a napkin so tightly her knuckles turned white. No one noticed the smartwatch on my wrist quietly recording every word, a small biosynapse feature originally designed for patients to remember conversations with doctors. Now, it preserves something just as vital, the truth. We always talk about you proudly, Ethan pushed on, his eyes betraying nerves. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is we're still family. I looked at him, weary more than bitter. Family isn't where your voice is erased, then patched over with flowery words when reputation is at stake. My father snapped. Violet, don't be so emotional. I just want peace. Peace means what? I asked. That I pretend to forget years of being treated as a shadow? That I sit here quietly while you rewrite a story that never happened? My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. Daughter, I was wrong, I admit it. But I've always followed you. I've always been proud. I turned to her, my eyes softer but not weak. Pride isn't something you hide away in a box under the staircase. Aunt Sarah, the only person in the room not trying to whitewash the past, gave me a small nod. Her gaze carried no words, but enough weight to remind me I wasn't completely alone. My father sat down in the chair by the fireplace, rubbing his forehead, his voice slower. You can blame me, but your success today, in some way, it was forged by being raised in a strict family. I let out a short laugh, not at him, but at the arrogance that still clung to him, even when exposed by truth. Strict? Or controlling? Or dismissive? The room fell silent again, heavier than the shock earlier. The ones who once believed they controlled the narrative were scrambling to cling to a new script, one where they remained the leaders, and I had only happened to move faster than expected. I stood, lifted my wine glass, and raised it to eye level. I'm glad I came back in time to hear all of this, because from now on, no one needs to guess. Everything is clear. I set the glass down, quiet, final. I didn't need anyone to respond, because now their words and what I heard were preserved in full, living evidence of a story once buried, and I was ready to rewrite it in the truth they had tried to suppress. The next morning, I rose earlier than everyone else. Winter sunlight cut through the second-floor bedroom window, casting pale strips across the floor. In that old room, where I had once pinned an anatomy chart beside a Star Trek poster, everything remained, but I was no longer that girl. I pulled on a light wool coat and went downstairs through the back staircase. My mother was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The soft clink of spoon against pot echoed steadily, like the heartbeat of a house trying to look normal. She glanced at me but said nothing. I didn't nod either. Between us stretched a distance that no unit could measure, the past not far enough to forget, the present not close enough to understand. I walked straight into my father's study. It was the room reserved for family meetings, only when matters were serious, announcing share divisions, sealing succession plans, arranging marriages. I flicked on the ceiling light, opened my laptop, and connected it to the sound system. The walls were nearly soundproof, a design of silent power my father had always preferred. At 9 a.m., I asked the house staff to call everyone to the study. The murmur in the living room went quiet immediately. Ethan called out, "What's going on?" We were just about to head out for brunch. I waited, giving no answer. One by one, they came in: my mother, my father, both brothers, then Aunt Sarah and Uncle Albert. I gestured to the leather chairs around the long table. No one asked questions. My father sat at the head, trying to mask his displeasure. From the night before, Ethan and Caleb fidgeted on either side. My mother quietly took a chair near the window, avoiding eye contact. Uncle Albert, usually silent in meetings, was present too, wearing a slightly rumpled gray suit, clutching his old leather notebook. I opened my laptop and pressed play on an audio file pulled from my smartwatch. The voices filled the room, crisp as if the conversation had just happened. Of course, her success comes from this family foundation. She once asked me to look over her MIT thesis, remember? We don't need to bring up the past. What matters is she's succeeded, and we're all happy for her. We've always told our friends about you. My mother clutched at her sleeve. My father shifted his legs but didn't deny it. I switched to the next slide, a set of emails from the old server, metadata intact. They were the letters I had written for 3 years, mailed to our home, marked as returned or unopened. The delivery service records confirmed, recipient refused signature. Then another file, a 2018 audio clip of my father speaking to Ethan. Don't lend her money. If you help her, she'll think she's on the right track. Let her stumble so she knows who her real support island. Caleb squirmed in his chair. Ethan stared down at the table. I looked around the room. Everything is here. Clear, intact, unedited. No one spoke. My mother turned to my father, her voice breaking. "Gordon, did you really say that?" He kept his face hard. "That was years ago. Everyone has their own way of raising children." Then Uncle Albert cleared his throat. All eyes shifted to him. He sat straighter, placing his notebook on the table, hands trembling slightly but his eyes steady. "Maybe I should have said this long ago," he began, voice low and rough. 5 years ago, Violet sent me her presentation on biosynapse. I read it carefully, very carefully, and I believed in what she was doing. I turned to him, startled. He gave a small nod, as if in apology. "I called Gordon," he continued. "Told him I wanted to invest not much, just $50,000 to help her start. But he threatened to cut me out of the board if I dared send the money. The room sank into silence, not for lack of words, but because everyone understood. The mask had fallen. My father was no longer the image of a principled patriarch. He was just a man who had tried to control everything and failed, when what he dismissed most became the brightest force in this house. Ethan buried his face in his hands. Caleb exhaled sharply. My mother turned away, stifling a sob. I met Uncle Albert's gaze, the gaze of a niece once abandoned by all, and gave a small nod. Late as it was, the truth had been spoken, and that was enough to upend the order they thought permanent. I left the study, stepping into the carpeted hallway where midday light poured quietly through tall windows. In my chest there was no triumph, no rage. Only a deep stillness, as if I had just cut a cord that had long since rotted. No one brought it up at lunch. Caleb excused himself to make a work call upstairs. Ethan slipped to the backyard to phone his wife. My mother sat at the table, carefully peeling slices of apple, her eyes unfocused. My father disappeared into the library, feigning busyness instead of facing anyone. I ate slowly, chewing as I observed in silence. No one spoke of the family's direction or the Moore legacy anymore. The grand walls they had built around me, the silence they used as a weapon, the authority they wielded to deny me, were crumbling from within. By afternoon, with the sky turning gray, I returned to the study to start a conversation on my own terms. I set my laptop on the table and opened a website I had finished the night before, a clean interface with a bold name across the screen, Heart Foundation, a platform for women who dare to forge their own path. The logo was abstract, a glowing neuron, its electronic branches spreading like light-breaking barriers. I chose it because it said everything: connection, growth, defiance of limits. I emailed the family the link with a simple invitation. 6 p.m., small conference room. I have a proposal. At exactly 6, they arrived. The room was quieter than usual, the air thick at the throat. My mother sat across from me, hands neatly folded in her lap, her gaze cautious but steady. My father leaned back, arms crossed. Ethan and Caleb watched, unsure. I projected the website onto the large screen and spoke clearly, voice even. Instead of returning to more dynamics, as father wants, I've chosen a different path, not tied to the company, not to inheritance, not to any so-called legacy. No one interrupted. I continued. The Heart Foundation will launch with an initial budget of $15 million. Its mission is to support women in science, technology, engineering, and community health, especially those from rural towns like the one we live in. I turned to my mother. Girls like I once was, told there were only two options: marry or work in a factory. I want them to see another choice. My father scoffed, lifting his hand from the chair. This sounds like some flashy charity project. What about profit? How's the system going to function? I looked him straight on. This isn't charity, it's investment in people. Every grant comes with conditions: transparent reporting, measurable outcomes, 3-year development contracts. More importantly, it's investment in the future, not just theirs, but the communities they live in. Ethan made a sound, maybe about to speak, but I raised my hand for him to wait. I'll bring in top experts in tech and medicine for the advisory board, and I want one member representing family experience. Someone who understands the invisible weight society has placed on women for decades. I faced my mother. Mom, I'd like to invite you to join the board as a voting member. She froze, her eyes wide, not with tears, but with shock. My father nearly leapt from his seat. You're inviting your mother? His tone was sharp. Lorraine has never managed anything. She has no experience, no expertise. How can she represent a multi-million-dollar foundation? I didn't look away from her. She's had a lifetime to understand why women are forced into silence. My mother swallowed hard. In her eyes, I saw something rising, not gratitude, but the unease of being acknowledged as someone with a voice, after years of being a background figure at every meeting. My father repeated, his voice lower but edged like steel. Lorraine, you're not actually considering agreeing to this nonsense, are you? My mother looked at him. This time, she didn't avert her eyes. She turned fully toward me, her voice soft but steady. I agree. No one spoke. Ethan's eyes widened. Caleb turned to look at our father, and my father's face flushed red, as if struck by a blow he hadn't expected. Lorraine, he hissed, do you know what you're doing? My mother drew a deep breath. I think it's time I had the right to speak, Gordon. I've lived my whole life in your shadow, and I've watched our daughter break free from it. The atmosphere in the room shifted. For the first time, no one stood by my father. He sat frozen, jaw tight, his eyes lost in his own home. I turned back to my mother, gently sliding a printed document in front of her. This is the organizational chart for the foundation. You'll have a voting seat, the authority to approve grants, and oversight for projects across the Midwest. Her hands trembled as she took it, but she held on firmly. In that moment, I no longer saw the woman who only sliced apples and poured tea during family meetings. I saw a part of myself once hidden, now slowly, stepping into the light. And I smiled not because things were changing, but because I had created the space for change to happen. Just weeks after that family meeting, what I thought would take years to unfold cascaded like dominoes falling in rapid succession. I got a call from Aunt Sarah around noon while I was on a video call with the medical advisory team for the Heart Foundation. Her voice carried hesitation, but no detours. Violet, your father, he started seeing a doctor. Therapy, twice a week, in Lincoln. I stayed quiet. She lowered her voice. He doesn't say much, but I think he's trying. I didn't answer right away. Between admitting fault and truly changing lies a wide gap. And for my father, a man who always equated remorse with weakness, choosing to see a therapist was already unheard of. A week later, Ethan sent me a short email, just a subject line, "Can we meet?" and a single line in the body, "More dynamics, needs to talk." I set the meeting at my attorney's office in Omaha. Ethan arrived first, then Caleb. Both wore suits, ties loosened, dark circles under their eyes. They sat across from me, carrying the weight of failure in their silence. Ethan spoke first. "The company's not doing well." Caleb jumped in, his tone flat. 3 production line upgrades stalled. Bank loans denied. 2 major clients pulled contracts. I nodded slowly. "And the cause?" Ethan stared at his hands. "We tried sticking to the old model, still producing the way Dad used to, but operating costs are too high. The tech is outdated. Investors want innovation, and we have nothing to show." "And Dad?" I asked. "He's still trying to hold on to control, but his health, not good. Sometimes he just sits in his office for hours, saying nothing." Caleb hesitated, lowering his voice. "We need you, Violet. We really do." I leaned back, eyes steady on them. "I'll help," I said, making them both look up at once, but not unconditionally. I placed a folder on the table. "I've prepared a restructuring plan. It includes shifting to sustainable manufacturing, integrating AI sensors into production monitoring, cutting energy waste, reducing industrial output. This direction won't just save the company, it'll open new markets." Ethan exhaled as though relieved. "Great, you'll manage the tech side, right? I'll handle operations support." "I'm not taking a technical role," I interrupted. "I want strategic control. Chief Innovation Officer reporting directly to the board, not under the CEO." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "So, Ethan steps aside?" "No," I shook my head. "I'm not here to chase titles. I want decisive authority over the most critical projects and veto power over any policy that undermines clean tech initiatives. They didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch. Because I knew agreeing meant admitting they could no longer steer the ship themselves. Finally, Ethan nodded. All right. If that's the price to save the company and Dad's legacy, then we agree. Caleb added quietly. We'll sign whatever's needed. I felt no joy, no vindication, only a sense of balance after years of being pushed aside because they didn't believe I could lead anything more related. After signing, I returned to the Hart Foundation office in Chicago, where my team was reviewing applications from more than 300 young women across the Midwest. On my desk lay a handwritten letter from a biology student in Kansas. She wrote that her father forbade her from pursuing medical research because that's a man's world. She ended, but when I read your story, I believed I have the right to try. I held the letter, pulse quickening beneath my skin. What I was building wasn't just to repair the past, it was to open doors for those who had never been allowed to step through. One late afternoon, as I was reviewing designs for More Dynamics' revamped production floor now with smart filtration and solar-paneled walls, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Your father wants to see you," she said softly. "He said, if you'll allow it." I sat in silence. That sentence was so unlike my childhood. Not a command, not an order, but a request. I looked at the clock. Wind rattled the windows, scattering the last red leaves across the street. Deep down, I knew it was time to sit down. Not to forgive hastily, but to listen. Not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman who had reclaimed her voice, and this time they couldn't take it away. A year later, Nebraska was white again with snow. The road to the Moore estate gleamed with lights, barren trees shivering in the cold. But inside, the house was unusually warm. I stepped in, the chill trailing me, followed by a group of young faces. Each wore neat attire, eyes shining with both nerves and pride. They were the first Hart Foundation STEM scholars. A year ago, most never imagined leaving their small towns, never dared write a line of code or step into a lab. Now some had won state science awards, others were applying for full scholarships. I hadn't brought them here to flaunt success. I brought them to the very place that once crushed my dreams, to prove that rejected seeds could bloom if given enough light. The living room felt cozier than I remembered. Ethan arranged chairs. Caleb dashed back and forth with hot tea for the scholars. My mother straightened the tablecloth, glancing at me with a quiet smile. My father stood by the fireplace, holding a mug of cocoa, his expression thoughtful, stripped of the rigid mask he'd worn for decades. When I walked in, they all turned. Ethan spoke first, his voice lighter. "Hey, sis." Caleb looked at the students. "Make yourselves at home." I nodded. "This is Nora, a first-year bioengineering student. Next to her is Lacey. You remember her, right? She codes better than her teacher now." "Lacey, my niece," Ethan's daughter blushed, giggling. Exactly 1 year earlier, she had stood at my bedroom door here, clutching an old laptop, asking a question that made me cry. "I want to be like you, not like them." She wasn't shy anymore. Lacey was building software to help rural teachers use AI in grading science work. Christmas dinner began. No formal speeches, no assigned seats by family rank. Just a meal with stories about a failed recipe, a school soccer win, laughter clinking with dishes. When dessert was served, my father stood, clearing his throat. He didn't look at me first. His eyes swept the table, pausing on Nora, then finally on me. "There's something I want to say tonight," he began, voice roughened by age. "Violet, you've become someone I never dared believe could exist, and I was wrong." The room stilled. My mother's hand tightened on her napkin. Ethan lifted his head. Caleb stopped chewing. I hadn't expected those words, yet when I heard them, they didn't sound like redemption but honesty, late but true. I smiled, not cold, not overwhelmed, just a calmness after years of storms. You weren't wrong, Father, I replied. You just didn't see. He froze, eyes searching for words, then only nodded. I rose, lifting my glass of red wine, chandelier light glinting through it. To truth, I said, my voice carrying in the quiet room. To freedom, I continued, eyes meeting my mother's, the woman who had finally stood after decades of silence. And to a new future, glasses lifted together, hands once chilled by distance, now raised in unison. I set my glass down, pulled a slim black folder from my bag, and slid it onto the table. Ethan frowned. What's this? He asked. I pushed it forward. My new startup, I said lightly. We're developing a neural interface to support post-stroke recovery. It's already in clinical trials. We plan to IPO next spring. Caleb nearly dropped his glass. You're taking it public? I nodded. And based on the current valuation from Morgan and McAllister, its market cap may surpass more dynamics. My father closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. No anger, no shock. For the first time, his gaze wasn't that of a father judging, but of a man seeing his daughter as she was, not through expectation, but through reality. Aunt Sarah smiled, raising her glass. Violet, you did it. Nora touched my hand, whispering, You made me believe in everything. I turned to her, smiling. Not because of me, I said. Because anyone can if they hold fast to what they know is right. Outside, snow fell quietly. Through the glass, white flakes sparkled like silent stars. I stood there, in the house that once suffocated me, now opening into doors with no boundaries, no hierarchies. Only people willing to relearn how to listen, and those brave enough to rise to be seen. What do you think of my journey from the daughter erased, cast out of the family picture, to the woman who wrote her own chapter by hand? Have you ever felt overlooked, hidden in someone else's shadow? And if you have, did you choose silence, or did you rise? I don't tell this story to prove I won revenge. I tell it to underline this. Recognition doesn't come from applause, but from the dignity we hold onto through the wreckage. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to let the past dictate the future. And what about you? If you were in my place, what would you do? Have you ever been misunderstood, excluded, or used by your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear your story. And if my journey touched something in your heart, hit follow to continue with me through more stories of family, betrayal, resilience, and endings that make us reflect on ourselves. Because sometimes the greatest gift in life is simply having someone who understands what we've been through